Afternoon. I think we're ready to go. So thank you everybody for coming to today's webinar on getting support on SuDS delivery. I'm Paul Shaffer and we're going to be with you for an hour talking through delivering SuDS. We've got three short presentations on different aspects of SuDS delivery. We've got one covering a general introduction, and then we've got a couple covering retrofitting of SuDS and also the delivery of high quality SuDS in and around housing. And I will introduce you to our speakers as we go along throughout the session. So the context really is, I think we're all becoming increasingly aware of the value of SuDS in terms of overcoming challenges related to climate change, urbanization, but also I think it's becoming clear that we recognize that SuDS can also deliver really exciting opportunities to improve the quality of our places and spaces for both people and wildlife. I think multi-beneficial green infrastructure and SuDS are starting to be recognised in policy documents. We've got the DEFRA's 25-year environment plan, we've got the National Planning Policy Framework, and there's also moves to include biodiversity net gain, which will also provide opportunities to link with SuDS and deliver multiple benefits. Also, we can see our neighbours in Wales have taken a bold step to implement statutory standards, which also include the delivery of multiple benefits based around the 4 pillars of SuDS, which are in the SuDS manual. And that as we go forward, it'd be interesting to see where the sewage companies go, sewage undertakers go with regards to design and construction guidance and see how that helps with the adoption of SuDS. As well as that, at this time, DEFRA is also undertaking some research to look at recommendations for updating England's non-statutory technical standards for SuDS, and hopefully you've responded to a survey, and if not, there would have been a note in your joining instructions. So in essence, everything's moving towards delivering good practice and delivering multiple benefits. We obviously want to be able to avoid bad practice because it gives SuDS a bad name, and it's also expensive and it slows down the delivery of housing. So in terms of what CIRIA are trying to do, we've been focusing on the delivery of SuDS that provide multiple benefits, and we provided support on SuDS for over 20 years with the idea of actually trying to get more than just flood risk and deliver the 4 pillars of SuDS. We typically, hopefully you realize that we provide guidance, but also we want to be able to provide practitioners and improvers the confidence to actually design and approve good schemes. We've got SuDS, which I hope you're aware of, which signposts guidance and includes over 100 case studies. We also deliver a number of free events and webinars, and we've got one coming up on the 9th of July on the design and construction guidance, and we've also got our SuDS Awards, which will be another opportunity to showcase good practice. And related to the awards, we've also got an opportunity for you to vote for a SuDS champion who's inspired, informed, and influenced the delivery of good SuDS schemes. But we're very conscious that we don't want the books to be sitting pretty on a shelf or sat dormant on someone's hard drive. We want people to have the confidence to be able to use the good practice. And I suppose since 2004, 2005, we've been delivering training on a number of aspects around SuDS, looking at the design foundation and detailed design, and also looking at construction SuDS, and we're hoping for later on in the year to look at opportunities for supporting people through the evaluation of SuDS schemes. Typically, they were delivered face-to-face, but we're increasingly moving these onto an online and webinar format. And so if you are looking for help with regards to delivery of SuDS, we can help your organization, but we're also running open SuDS courses. So today's presentations are from CIRIA SuDS trainers, and between them, they've probably got about 70 years worth of SuDS design experience and a vast number of different types of SuDS schemes going forward. So this is the time for our first poll, and this is really to gauge what is your role related to SuDS. So Okay, now seeing as most of you have voted, we have the majority of people in our audience are engineers, and then we've got people working in local authority approval. I suspect there's some overlap between those two. So thank you for responding to that poll, and there'll be a few more as we go along. So now moving on to our first presenter. This is Steve Wilson, and Steve's been designing and researching SuDS since 2001, and he's been delivering the SuDS training with CIRIA since 2005. Steve's co-authored a number of CIRIA guidance documents, including the SuDS manual and also guidance on the construction of SuDS. And when it comes to SuDS, Steve gets particularly excited when working with landscape architects to design a good-looking multifunctional SuDS scheme. So over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this webinar. So I'm just going to run through what are the basics of good SuDS design. So we'll start off with an overview of what we're doing. What are the real basics? So that's using the full range of SuDS components that are available and using them in the right situations. So it's not just permeable pavement, for example, or it's not just using infiltration techniques. There's a whole range of things that you can use that are appropriate in different situations. We obviously want to achieve all the main design requirements from the new SuDS manual, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I think this is probably the number one basic, which is master planning SuDS and integrating them into the development design and the development layout. It's the number one fundamental thing that you need to do to get the best out of SuDS. Other basics, we need safe SuDS, and I'll talk about how we do that without putting big fences around things. But also we want to design effective SuDS on all sites, and that means designing effective SuDS around specific site constraints such as contaminated ground or sloping sites. Neither of those are an excuse for not using SuDS on a site. Next slide, please. And then again, fundamental basic really is multidisciplinary working. So it's vital that drainage engineers work with planners and landscape architects, and the other way around as well. There's no one professional sort of sphere that's more important than another. It's multidisciplinary working, and everybody's contribution is important. So you can see on both these schemes, the one on the left is in New Zealand. Rain gardens being installed along both sides, the full length of that street as far as the eye can see, and several other similar streets in that area have rain gardens like that. On the right hand side, you can see this is a retrofit scheme we were involved with in Hammersmith, and you can see there on the green area there's a series of SuDS. There's a swale stroke basin sort of in the centre of that photograph, and then on the other side of the path to the left hand side there's another basin, but you can see they look completely different. Now as an engineer I can't do that. That's all down to the landscape architects. The other interesting point about both these schemes, one in England, one in Auckland in New Zealand, if you read all the papers, because there are quite a lot of papers published about that one in Auckland, they have exactly the same constraints that we have in this country. Nothing different really, but they've managed to put some really good SuDS in there. Next slide. So yeah, another basic, you need to be open-minded about the design. Fundamentally, what we're doing with SuDS, if we want them to be truly multifunctional and achieve all the requirements in the SuDS manual, is that we want to aim for landscape systems at the surface, and they should achieve a range of functions. That is the ideal, and that's what we should be aiming for, and that's where you should start. But sometimes, because of the constraints on a site, you will end up using more engineered systems, and you might end up using underground storage, such as that in the bottom picture. So don't discount underground storage, because sometimes it can help you achieve what you want to achieve in terms of landscaping and multifunctionality. And on a lot of sites, a combination of solutions is appropriate. But what you shouldn't do is start at the bottom and design things as pipes and underground systems, and then put something like a pond or a basin at the end of it. Yeah, the underground systems really should be a last resort if you can't achieve the surface or near surface systems. Next slide. So this is the basis of the design requirements in the SuDS manual, and it's referred to as the 4 pillars of SuDS. So you can see there on the right hand side, that's a diagram from the SuDS manual. So I've got a list on the left hand side. Whenever we see this, and even on that diagram, if you read that diagram in the normal way that you read things, quantity comes first, then you move across to quality, then you go down across to amenity, and biodiversity comes last. So I think a real problem is that we always list them in that order. So in my list, I've put incorporating amenity and biodiversity at the top. Source control, so controlling runoff where it as close as possible to where it hits the ground. So using swales around the outside of a car park, or basins that are really close, or rain gardens, green roofs, permeable pavements, really, really important. Allied to that, it's not exactly the same, but there are some, so it's allied to source control, is the provision of interception. So you're preventing runoff for the majority of rainfall events, up to around about 5 millimetres. We're managing pollution, because runoff from paved surfaces that are trafficked is polluted. And we want to control runoff volumes as well as rates. So we talk to a lot of people even now and ask them about SuDS design, what do you have to do? And the first thing they'll say is you design it so that you control the runoff to a greenfield runoff rate. As you can see, that's nearly at the bottom of my list, and it's only one of many other things that good SuDS design includes. And then finally, you've got to look at exceedance. As you would for any drainage system, you need to consider exceedance design. Next one. Going back to master planning, absolutely vital again. Can't understate that point. So the first process in master planning is to understand the natural drainage patterns. And as part of the training we've been delivering to water companies recently, we've been explaining this process to them, and certainly I think they will be looking for this as part of the adoption process going forward. So it is going to become more prominent. But you can see on the right hand side, we explained this in the CIRIA training. It looks simple. You just put in arrows, which way will water flow on a contour map of the site, and then looking at how the building interrupts those flows, which will then guide you to where you're going to put your SuDS. So that modified flow route within the development. But it's really, really important part to get successful SuDS. Next slide. Safe SuDS. They can be safe without big and ugly fences. And health and safety certainly shouldn't be a reason for omitting surface water features. But again, it comes back to that integrated design that's master planned in. But CIRIA and SuDS in particular, there's a lot of information and guidance and help on how to design safe SuDS. But for what you cannot do, you cannot manage the health and safety of poor design with signs and barriers, such as this one in this photograph. Not least, I mean, if you see that, no trespassing, danger, keep out, strictly no access at any times, giving completely the wrong message about water in the environment. And it's sterilised a massive chunk of what could be useful green space in that development. Yeah, in my opinion, it's an absolutely appalling approach. Next one, please. So we'll just have a quick poll in a minute. So I was driving around a site a couple of weeks ago and came across this. So you can see when I stand in the bottom of that, I'm sort of just about, my head is just about level or just below the top of that swale in inverted commas. So particularly, I wasn't particularly impressed with that. Okay, it might have some biodiversity, it probably meets all the hydraulic requirements. Yeah, it looks like it probably gives good treatment as well. But as an amenity feature, I wouldn't consider that to be multifunctional in any respect. And if it does fill up with water, and looking at the size of the pipes that feed into it, I suspect there are quite high flows if it reaches capacity. There might be health and safety issues. So would you like to live next door to that one? Or if we go to the next one, would you like to live next door to that? Now, unfortunately, I haven't got better pictures of this one. You do have to recognise this in SuDS design, that sometimes when the planting dies back in winter, it might not be as colourful and as pleasant as it is in summer. So if we go to the poll, please, and which one would you like living next to? Example 1 or example 2?
Okay, so mercifully and sensibly, it looks like most people are wanting to live in example 2. So that is great.
Right. Okay. So if we just go to the last slide, a quick summary. So, getting basics right. If you get the basics right, what you will end up with is good quality schemes. You'll achieve all the objectives in the SuDS manual, and in Wales, it's even more important because there are legal requirements in terms of the national standards that you'll achieve. The SuDS will be valued by the residents and users. You can reduce costs in many cases. You provide systems with integrated safety. For developers, there's probably going to be less risk of delays during planning, getting approval, and you end up with robust schemes hydraulically from a pollution point of view. And I'll just leave you with a video of water flows in a retrofit scheme that we've done in London recently. So it's a bit jerky on my screen, probably because it's a big video. I think you can see there that if you've got well-designed SuDS, essentially, you can see there's water coming down the downpipes, but it's dispersed into that swale, for example, and you don't actually see any. The water flow in the bottom of the swale is so low that it's just hiding in the grass, basically. Right. You can stop that now. Well, enough.
Great, well, thank you for that. And we've got time for another poll, really. This is asking about what do you use most often for guidance? So if we can run that poll, that would be great. Okay, marvelous. So most of you have voted. So 76% of you have used the SuDS manual, so that's great. And it looks like 10% use SuDS Drain. So SuDS Drain is being added to all the time with new case studies. So at the moment, you will see some of the case studies that we got from a recent awards nomination. So we're probably on SuDS Drain, whether it be on case studies or the awards. We've probably got about 100 case studies to look at. So we've got quite a good resource. So thank you for that presentation, Steve, and also thank you for the vote. So we're now going to move on to our next presentation. And before I do so, can I just remind people, please use your questions box if you want to ask questions. we've probably got three of the country's best SuDS experts on the webinar at the moment. So there will be an opportunity to quiz them, so please do ask questions. So now moving on to our second presentation, and this is going to be from Anthony McCloy. And Anthony is Managing Director of McCloy Consulting, and is a chartered engineer who has been designing SuDS since 2003 and working with us to deliver such training since 2006. So he's been involved in various CIRIA projects to produce guidance, and he also co-authored the SuDS Design and Evaluation Guide. He's working with CIRIA and others on a team led by HR Waniford to work on recommendations to DEFRA for updating the English SuDS standards. And Anthony's main motivation on working with SuDS is to work with water to improve our urban landscapes. So, Anthony, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Fabulous, excellent.
Thanks, Paul. It's great. Thanks for the invite. It's great to have a good, valid reason to get away from homeschooling for an hour at least. Anyway, retrofit. I suppose I'm going to start this presentation with a question mark. Why retrofit for SuDS? I suppose from my perspective, what we've lost over the decades since the introduction of conventional drainage and piping water onto the ground is this engagement with water as part of the environment, and through retrofit is something that we can re-engage with, seeing water as part of the environment, seeing how it's tangible and the benefits it can bring. But as we look to the future, with the whole adage of climate change and the impact of flooding from ever-increasing intensities of rainfall, and we're seeing, visibly, it's not for somewhere elsewhere in the world, we see visibly in our front doorsteps how the conventional gully system can't necessarily cope with these increasing intensities of rainfall. Again, living in a city, I live in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. The economic drivers here, we have a sewage system which is creaking at capacity. To free up capacity into the future, it's not just about putting SuDS in new sites. We need to look at the existing infrastructure and how we free up capacity in that. And we have two main opportunities there, both through the opportunity for retrofit and also through redevelopment. So every time we get a redevelopment of a scheme, it provides an opportunity there to actually throttle back on the existing flows that are going into the system, and that may free up capacity for elsewhere. The image you have in front of you there is a scheme from a few years back now. It's Australia Road. It's probably one of the more well-recognised schemes in the country. We'll talk about it again in a minute, but that scheme actually started life not as a SuDS scheme. It started off as a public realm, as a shared space for a school and a local community, that they wanted to make the space a safer and better place to be. And through that, the client, which is the local authority in this instance, realised that SuDS would actually benefit the scheme. And over the course of the design, SuDS became the focal point of the whole scheme. So it's to show that SuDS isn't just a hindrance; it can really elevate the aesthetics and how the scheme is viewed. In saying that, the experience from doing these retrofit schemes is retrofit of SuDS isn't straightforward. There's a wide range of factors need to be taken into consideration, and it's important we get to know this at the start. Paul, next slide, please. Thanks. So beginning the retrofit project. Firstly, as mentioned in the last slide, many of these schemes started something else. That picture there, the image you have, is of a park. It was a redevelopment of the park to make it a more pleasing place to be. The client, again in this one, through communication with ourselves, and we worked with Robert Bray on this, realised there was a significant opportunity to take all the highway runoff from a significant highway this is outside the Civic Centre in Haringey, take all the highway runoff, disconnect it from the surface water sewer, and take it through a series of, well, essentially vegetated rain gardens and basins and swales through the site, losing a lot of that water, improving the quality of it before it then feeds back into the stormwater sewer and then down to the Moselle. So as we look at restoration of water courses, what we need is the supply of clean water going into these water courses. We can't just be reliant on whenever we start to open up culverts that water is going to be clean, so we want to cleanse that water that is in the existing sewer system. But we can have all our sorts of systems. We have public realm, we could be creating livable neighbourhoods, we could even be highway improvements and integration of cycle lanes. So that's a relatively short list. There's lots of opportunities out there in terms of retrofit, and we need to be exploring all of the opportunities as they arise. As we start, significant understanding needs to be taken of the engineering and social complexities around all of this. We're really tasked with understanding how the team or how the scheme is going to impact. We need to understand the range of drivers, what needs to be realised from the scheme, the opportunities, the challenges. There's a good broad understanding that we need to gather at the start of the project. And really that's all about good engagement and communication, both with the client and the wider project team. We're engineers, we work with landscape architects, we'll work with ecologists, there may be river restoration people, there'll be a wide range of people that could be sitting around that table. And I suppose from experience, we're doing this over a number of years, the real trick and the real learning outcome here is knowing how to ask the right questions early enough in the project that we can make a meaningful impact as we move through the project. Paul, next slide, please. In terms of applying key design principles, I suppose firstly it's identifying what those principles are. And we can look to the SuDS manual, we can look at other places to evaluate what they might be. And it's the same for any type of design. We might be designing a car or we might be designing a house, but we identify what the key principles of that design are and what the objectives and what we're trying to achieve at the outcome of the project. Firstly, from a SuDS perspective, it's part of the landscape, it's part of something we all interact with. So we need to understand the context, how we're going to use that scheme. And we're designed for people first and foremost. But then as we move through the project, it's really about understanding and being able to, well, I suppose to put it in a terminology, getting your eye in for opportunity, to understand that every part of that site can serve a drainage function. It's just about repurposing existing materials and the way we use existing spaces that can reserve for our different purposes. And through that, if we bring that water back to the surface, then we start to realise the real potential for the potential for interaction between people and ecology, and creating a real diversity in the appearance and how the space is used. Paul, next slide, please. Just want to mention briefly about the design challenges. This is something we get into a lot more detail in the actual design course for SuDS. But really, in retrofit projects, it's very different to a greenfield site where we're coming onto sort of virgin land where it hasn't really been touched in terms of development before. So we're going to expect a wide range of things that we need to encounter, we need to cater for, we need to design for. So there may be things like contaminated land issues, whether or not we infiltrate through that. That's a significant consideration. We could have major services, utilities. The plan you have in front there is, again, Australia Road. There's a substation just in the middle to the north of the plan, and the high voltage cables run in either direction through the site. So that was something of a major consideration in terms of layout, in terms of how the layout interacted with the existing utilities, and in particular levels, making sure that there was no conflict in levels between the proposed drainage and the existing utilities that we didn't want to shift or move. Paul, if you just click on there, please. So you can see in the cross section there, there's a lot of things in the start of a project are fixed. We have fixed levels at the perimeters of the site. We're not going to start to build up by 400 or 500 millimeters. So we have to work with those levels, and we have to ensure that as we collect that water and move it through the site, we're cleansing it, we're conveying it, but we're conveying it at a shallow level. So if we want to realize the potential of water at the surface, by the time it actually reaches a basin or a rain garden or biotension area, it's still traveling at a point where it's you know, as Steve's slides are showing, it's not significantly below ground level. So in this example here, we're coming in and we're literally about 100 mil conveyance of water below the ground. It's not going much deeper than that. So by the time we actually get to the basin, we're coming in at a very shallow level. Paul, next slide, please. The one thing that we really need to do as an industry, and I suppose there are a number of people online today, and it's something to take away and have a proper think about, is some of the conventions we've adopted over the years in the industry. There's many rules, and I put that in inverted commas. I'm not in, this isn't a classroom-based or a large room like you visibly see me, but if you put the inverted commas around those rules, because really what they are is they're meant as guidance and screening in terms of things we should be thinking about and taking further consideration whenever we're in proximity. So to give you a couple of examples, a 5 meter offset from building for infiltration has widely been stated as, you know, you shouldn't infiltrate within 5 meters, but really that was only ever intended as a guide to think about it more carefully. And other things like the minimum flow control setting of 5 liters a second, we still see commonly cited by engineering reports. Again, it's not the question we ask. We start the phrase there by asking how or do we protect that opening from blockage, not how low that flow rate should be. So the understanding here is that this thinking came from a different time. It was a different context. We're thinking about conventional drainage, where there was a different set of parameters where we were concentrating flows and conveying underground without any real protection of blocking of debris and litter getting into our systems. We're coming from a different place now, so we need to be able to challenge these perceptions and basically bring in further innovation and creativity by not accepting the norm for the way we've done it for the last 30, 40 years. So training largely can be, well, putting a slight sales hat on here, the training can be an opportunity from getting away from day-to-day work where we're used to doing it the way we've always done, and to liberate the thinking that we apply and see things from different perspectives. So I suppose my experience over the last 15 years delivering training is that we can have fairly detailed discussions around all these subjects, and we can, you know, get into a fair bit of detail around the different limitations and aspects we have to think about and deliver. Just touching upon the graph, anybody who knows me will generally know there's a graph in most of my presentations. This is really about the betterment. It comes from a fact sheet that's available on SuDS, and really what I was trying to do with the fact sheet was challenge the way we approach 50% betterment that's applied in London, and we apply different figures elsewhere in the country. And we're still at a point where we're saying, well, we hold that water, we store it and we release it, but we're still taking the approach where we release it fairly quickly. And once I did a bit of research into the whole subject matter, I found that a lot of the time in the various examples I looked at, most of the water that we're storing was only been stored for a very short amount of time. So if you look at the shaded areas is how the water is being stored, and the dashed lines is how we're controlling the flow. So the blue line is the control of flow from dark blue line is the control of flow from how I would envisage we should be storing in retrofit schemes. The red dotted red line is how we normally the common industry approaches at the minute, and the green line, which is sort of touching the red line there at same peak, is the uncontrolled flow for the 1 in 100 year plus climate change. So in essence, in this one, we're saying that we're not utilizing any more storage. What we're doing is we're controlling in a different manner. We're controlling to much lower flows from much more range of rainfall events, but we're holding that water. So it's not just about the rate at which we're dispersing at, it's about the time of attenuations, how long we're holding that water back, because we want to ensure that the water is held long enough in the system for the peak risk to have passed downstream in terms of surface water flooding or combined sewer overflow spill. So it's really about thinking about things in a different manner in many occasions. Paul, next slide, please. I wanted to show this slide, this image. It's from a conference that we organised last year with Robert Ray's up in Sheffield, and the real draw to this scheme is, well, firstly, the design was led by Sheffield City Council. We were involved in the periphery, in hydraulic assessment and some peer review of design. But in terms of the scheme design, the aspirations and the ambition that was shown was probably unparalleled in terms of the UK context. They're in the process of creating 1,400 linear meters of meadowland through Sheffield City Centre, all of which is acting as a SuDS scheme. So it's disconnection of the combined sewer. So water that once went, stormwater that once went to be treated at the water treatment works is now slowly passing through the system and eventually ending up in the River Don. So instead of travelling a number of miles to the wastewater treatment works, it's travelling to the bottom of the hill and then going 100 metres into the river at a controlled rate. There's many engineering challenges that had to be overcome in terms of design, as you can imagine. But a number of those challenges were also about challenging mindsets of the design team. So there's probably about 20 in the design team. And from the image there, you can see, unfortunately, I don't have my control of the mouse here to point it out, but you can see there's a flush curb. That's a highway very close to Sheffield City Centre. Yes, well, thanks. That essentially buses and cars still travel up and down that on a daily basis. And the flush curb there allows water straight off the highway and into the basin. As far as I'm aware, nobody's driven off the road into the basin as yet. I'm sure it may happen at some stage in the future, but it hasn't happened. So there's a large acceptance from the designers that this would be acceptable in terms of not following the convention to have an upstanding curb. We also had small openings. We down to 30 mil openings in the control cells. As water moved from one meadow cell to the next, it was controlled to very low flow rates to utilize the storage right throughout the system. And also there was infiltration, and most of the site is underlaid by sort of low levels of contaminated ground. So again, it was the challenge of the perception that we can't infiltrate into contaminated soils. In this instance, we were utilizing the sort of the highly aerated rainwater to provide some levels of remediation over time. So again, a wide range of engineering challenges, and we can set our ambitions and aspirations as far as into without limits as we can to really get as wide a benefit and as good a scheme as we can deliver. And that's what for me. Paul, thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Anthony. Thank you for the presentation. Now we're moving on to our last presentation, and this is from Bob Bray. So Bob founded Robert Bray Associates, and he's a director there. And I suppose really Bob's light bulb moment with regards to SuDS came in 1996. He was at a conference, and there was a presentation on examples of SuDS or our equivalent of SuDS in the US and Sweden. So as well as looking at stormwater management and surface water management, Bob got excited by the potential benefit of looking at SuDS with regards to integrating clean water into our urban landscapes. So Bob's been involved in CIRIA's training since the beginning, since 2005, and he's been involved in a number of CIRIA SuDS guidance documents and also co-authored the design and valuation guide. Bob Bob's main focus is on clean water and the use of source control to manage diffuse pollution in our towns and cities. His inspiration is really of the potential of an urban environment that's integrated with clean water. So Bob, over to you.
Right. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Well, hello to everybody that I can't see. Here we are, last, I hope, but not least. As a landscape architect, my motivation for this is about people and places being enhanced by work we do. So whether that's as a landscape architect, which is what I trained for, I suppose, the wonderful thing I thought about SuDS as it's now become is the opportunities that it presents. Paul's asked me to focus on housing, and so I'll go straight to the next slide and start that discussion. The scheme on the front there was Australia Road, which was one that we won some good awards for design. And I'm going to focus with that was one we worked with Anthony on, by the way. And it's focus really on the design, because everything that we should be doing with SuDS has an impact on us at the surface. It should do, because that's where water is. And I've just put a couple of slides here that there's a picture here of a basin, a natural basin in Pembrokeshire. And that's the inspiration for what we do. That is to try and regain those characteristics that give us so much pleasure. That is clean water, relatively clean water falling from the sky, and relatively clean water making its way to the sea. So that picture at the top there on the top right is an inspiration for the sort of thing that on the bottom right here is at a housing scheme in Stroud. I live in Stroud. This is a co-housing scheme. And so here we've got a small basin, a small pond, a raised pond, which is basically as much for health and safety. No fences here. Negotiation with all the people, and they were initially a little bit skeptical, but as soon as they saw that all the children were actually sitting on the wall looking into the pond, the idea that they could live with water very, very quickly established itself, and they were all for this. And fortunately, we were able to discuss with all the prospective buyers of these houses right at the beginning, which is a luxury that most housing areas don't have. So we were able to incorporate all sorts of interesting features which you probably won't associate with most housing schemes. Obviously, we recognise there are some basics, and although we're landscape architects, we've got fingers, so we can add up, and we can manage flow and volume, and we understand those requirements. And we've worked with engineers to make sure that we know how to do that with them. But the other factors of managing rainwater are not, in a sense, engineering. They're conceptual. The idea of delivering clean water is it's not magic, in the sense that unless you say that the bacteria and the processes that water goes through. So the water that comes to this little basin has been selected to be clean. So it's roof water coming into this basin, with some water coming via a management train, that magic term that we all use to sort of describe what we all should be doing. So I'm going to go through another 2 or 3 pages of examples of how this is. We've done this on housing schemes. So if you keep your mind, this is the bottom right here is the co-housing scheme in Stroud, 50 units per hectare, so relatively dense. No big green spaces apart from a single play space. And the single play space, which I don't have a picture of here, unfortunately, is the single space which is available for people. So we had to be very careful in using it. And I'll mention that again when we come to some other slides. So Paul, if you could go forward, that would be great. So this is, again, these are pictures of the scheme in Stroud. And there, again, is where people live and work. Now, the thing we found and learned very early on is that you can't do SuDS if you don't change some of your practices. And one of the issues at the moment is that the drainage of housing people have not changed how they approach the problem. So what you generally see is gullies, pipes under the ground, and a sodding grate hole at the end, which we call a SuDS basin, which is usually far too deep to use effectively by people, and is carrying polluted water into something which should be pristine. That is, if it's used for wildlife or people, it should be clean water. So how do you do this in a housing scheme? The first thing is you have to change your current practice. Try not to try and do SuDS using exactly the same thought processes and detailing and pipes that have been used in the past. So the top slide here is one example of how, and I think Steve's slides have shown this. This is one example of taking water, intercepting water through a shoe at the bottom of a downpipe, and in this case, dropping it into what we call a rill. That is a small channel which will take water to the next part of the system. So we've changed the collection of water here, and we've changed the conveyance of water here. And we're keeping all of this water at or near the surface. So that's our first rule, if you like. And on the bottom, the car park in this scheme, and it's on a very steep sloping site. This is about 1 in 7 in places. Here, the site was divided into two by a very 4 meter high crib wall, and so all the cars were concentrated in one location by agreement with the people who lived there, and that's the water there is collected in a car park. The permeable pavement cleans that water before it starts its journey, so it is source control, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the point I'm making here is that we have changed the way that we are collecting water. We have changed the fact that we're not conveying it directly to the end of the site. All of this water is being managed at source, and these are two examples: one, to change how you collect it; two, to change how you convey it. And in the bottom, we're splitting the site up into small compartments, if you like, so that we can be assured that we use the site effectively to do all the things we want to do. Critical stage, but our first step in site design. Paul, next one, please. So this is the top one here is another example. This is on a site in Cambridgeshire, 35 units per hectare, much more like the medium sized spaces, medium sized density, or the medium density of housing that is very common. This is an underdrain swale. This is a simple device, shallow. You saw the very deep swale in Steve's presentation. This is 150 mil or thereabouts deep. It's not trying to store big volumes of water. It's collecting. On the left-hand side, we've got some permeable pavement, but on this swale is collecting all the additional water from those surfaces which are not permeable. So again, we're collecting water in a different way. We're collecting it at source. The source control means that any water that now leaves that top site is clean. And the conveyance at the bottom, this is Stroud again. Here's a rill running in front of people's houses, which carries most of the water most of the time. The big volumes, however, are diverted into a green space. That is the play space I was referring to earlier. So we're splitting these areas up into different spaces. I suppose the term that followed after, in a sense, is this idea of subcatchments. So all of these sites have been split up into subcatchments, so we've got a very efficient use of the space that we have available. So, right, Paul, next one, please. And on the top right here again, 35 units per hectare. This is a swale that runs around the site, carrying the larger volumes of water. But although this is each a part of these swales, and there's a basin which we'll see in a minute, they've all got flow control. So there's multiple flow controls. There are different subcatchments holding all of those various volumes of water, and at each place, water has been, the critical volume, that is stuff from the car park or from roads, is cleaned before this water goes into these surface features. So there's a a hierarchy of collecting, cleaning and storing in these subcatchments right the way through the design, which means that you're using these sites so much more efficiently. And then at the bottom, we're going to a very, very dense site up to Stamford. This is a site which is 2004, thereabouts. And the reason I'm using these older sites here, and we're doing a new one, for instance, for co-housing, using the same principles, but we haven't got the evidence. This is all evidence that these things work, that they work over time. And most of the time here, again, permeable pavement in these high density sites, all the storage, most of the storage here is within the structure of the development. So little bits of water that aren't catered for by the permeable pavement, we can have small features which add amenity to the site. The people here are hardly aware of this being a drainage system. All they see is a surface where they run their cars on or whatever, and what they're probably not aware of is underneath nearly all of the storage for this site is within these hard surfaced areas. Another point I'd like to make is that if you look at most housing areas at the moment, the pipe system is the drainage system. The pipe can, but as soon as the water's collected in a gully of some description, the pipe takes the water as far away from the housing as it possibly can be, usually to the periphery. Using pipes just as links between one permeable pavement and the next part of the permeable pavement, as short links between a swale and a basin. In that way, you're changing the way you're looking at managing these flows. Next one, Paul. And there's again at the top, that's the 106 units per hectare. These features that you're seeing here, a lot of these features here are not SuDS. These are part of the scheme. At Stamford, we specifically were asked to create some interest within a very dense scheme, basically so that the scheme itself, they could sell the houses. So we suggested a series of shallow canals, which the developer was very happy to do. But the actual work, most of the work is done in the permeable pavement. Now that pavement would have had to, there's no additional space required for SuDS here. We have used those spaces which are available to us. So all of the pavements are doing work. These features which the developer wanted as visual interest in the site, they are the conveyance for all of that water before it drops into the River Welland. So again, another myth which has grown up is that somehow SuDS is expensive. All of these features are either part of site development, the quality of the site that we're trying to design, or they're integrated into the structure of it, whether it's be pavement or open space. And so at the bottom here, this amenity space on the Flows project at Landrove in Cambridgeshire, that space was available. It was an amenity space which was designated by the council, that space had to be there. So again, we go further into the development, and all the hard surfaces which are adding pollution as well as volume, permeable surfaces there clean that water sufficiently so that when that water, and through flow control as well, so although the roof water goes directly into this space, relatively clean water could go into this space and run down through the small swale stroke low flow channel here. Most of the water that enters it is clean because it's come through the permeable pavement. So on a day-to-day basis, all people see here is a modest flow of water travelling through the system, down through the low flow channel and the swales. But that amenity space is available when the big storms hit, because then the modest everyday spaces fill and it overflows. So maximum use of these spaces, even though it's a SuDS scheme, nothing with a fence around. The only thing, ironically, the only fence on this site is around the playground. And the children don't play in the playground, they play in the swales. An interesting observation, should we say, that all the play goes on in the interesting green space, not in the flat space for the children.
Okay.
So my point here, I suppose, is that if you integrate SuDS design into the whole landscape, if you take it as a landscape that is to accommodate water, you're able to incorporate all the things that we aspire to: the management train, the source control, new ways of collecting water, and that water is stored within there in a very efficient way for the benefit of everybody who lives there. And this is a classic case. And fortunately, the Flows project has been really well monitored. Not only does it perform well in terms of biodiversity, in terms of amenity, the water is clean. We know this by all the monitoring that's gone here. We know there's been no flooding within this development. And the other thing is it's very simple to maintain, because most of the maintenance costs are associated with looking after the landscape. And the final one is the people really like living there, and they believe that this is a nice place to live, and they identify the SuDS as being one of the things that's done it. Oh, and of course, it's 10 to 15% cheaper than if you've done it conventionally, and that's the contractor's own figures. I think that's quite a nice thing to be able to end up saying. So thank you very much for that, and I hope that's been of interest to you. Bye for now.
Great, thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. So I'm very conscious of the time. We said we were going to a few questions. I recognise we're very close to 3 o'clock, so hopefully some of the speakers can stay on the line for a little bit, and we're happy to run through a few of the questions. We got over 30, so there's not a chance that we'll be able to answer all of those. So while we're unmuting the speakers' speakers' microphones and trying to get them on the webcam, we've got one last poll really. So it's if you've completed the survey or not on the recommendations for updating non-statutory technical standards. So great. Okay, so that poll is open, and while we're doing that, I will also try and multitask. So it's looking like the majority of you haven't. So on your joining instructions email, you should have seen the link for the survey. So if you can answer, if you're involved in SuDS delivery, that would be great. So what I will try and do is I will see where we are with regards to our question. And I suppose the first question is to Steve, really. It's related to our first example, Steve, where it says within the within the space on the first example, how would you redesign to make the SuDS features less deep?
You can't, just by dealing with that small area, you can't. You'd have to. It needs a wholesale root and branch reassessment. I suspect it's that deep. Because there's probably not any source control upstream of it. That's usually one of the main reasons why you end up with such deep features. And also it may well be because it's going under crossroads where the buried services are deeper. But you can design around those issues. So fundamentally, the whole scheme would have to be looked at. You can't just look at it and say you would do certain things to that feature in that location.
Great, thank you for that. So Bob, sorry, I just bear with me. I just find the question for you that I had flagged. So here's a question from Nick Southworth. So thank you thank you to Andy for that previous question, and thanks Steve for that answer. So this question is from Nick. He says, how do you find discussions go with health and safety consultants when often they say put a fence around it? How can we get away from having to put fences around ponds and basins? Bob?
See, as a landscape architect, we have to deal with this all the time. All sites should be designed with health and safety measures in mind. So the first one is to, perhaps the sensible way is to go to ROSPA. ROSPA agree with our approach, is that as long as the features that you design, you can justify that they are designed in a safe way. Our approach is that rather than fences, you have easy access and easy exit, that you have a sequence of shelves or levels that you move down to get into the water, so you have no abrupt edges, and that by designing the depths of water, I think nearly all of our schemes, we would say the maximum depth is ever 600 deep, but you don't get immediately into 600. You go through a 150 depth and then a 300 depth before you get to say 450 or 600. And you can justify on quite reasonable terms as to why you should do this. Now, if somebody says that you can children drown in an inch of water, what you have to accept is that the only way you can deal with that sort of argument is say you have no water. And we all agree as a society that we enjoy water. So you have to establish that water in the landscape is a legitimate thing to do, and that you have done everything that is reasonable to prevent accidents. Now, the fence doesn't do that. All the fence does is it allows small children to get over and into the water, and it prevents adults, particularly adults of a certain age, like grandparents, from getting in to rescue their children. Now, there's a sophisticated, way of discussing all of this thing, but the main thing is to say is you justify that it is safe as is reasonable, and that you can demonstrate that train of safety issues as you go through, and that the fence or signage that says don't go anywhere. The only people who take no notice of either of those things are the people you're trying to protect.
Great, thanks, Bob.
Can I just add one thing to that? That if in a risk assessment you do decide you need low level barriers to limit or to sort of discourage access, and as Bob said, everything should be designed to be shallow. But on that first slide of mine, there was a picture of a pond down the bottom of the valley, which is, I'm not saying the pond itself is a great example, but the fence at the top and the flowers and the way that has been planted is actually acting as a barrier. So you can integrate barriers into the design of the landscape that are not obtrusive as well. So there are lots of things. The last thing you should be doing, as I said in my presentation, is putting signs and fences up that tell people not to go into places. Great.
Thank you for that, Steve. Really thorough answer. So the last question probably is going to be for Anthony. And this question is, and it's from Daniel Creech. It says, are SuDS a viable solution to development achieving a nutrient neutrality? I think this is coming through from Natural England at the moment, that they want to reduce the amount of nutrients.
Well, to begin with, rainwater should be relatively nutrient low. Therefore, in terms of feeding nutrients into the wider landscape, I suppose one of the things that we haven't talked about today is designing for maintenance and management, and we shouldn't be designing landscapes that could be conveying water where there's potential that we're feeding additional nutrients in. So that might be one thing. The nutrients that we might be talking about here, in terms of there's a couple of really good examples in terms of the monitoring and validation that's been done in these systems. One of the very early ones done with Bob and Hopwood was showing that the water going into the water course from the SuDS system was cleaner and less nutrient rich than the actual water in the water course itself. So that's certainly one. One that's probably more documented would be the other example showed by Bob there in terms of Landrove. You can find in the web resources water quality. So in terms of these systems, yeah, I think that all SuDS schemes should be designed in terms of management training, in terms of bringing in treatment and where possible passive treatment, where the systems are acting naturally to break down contaminants and to sort of process them into sort of their original constituents, so things like hydrocarbons, all the organic pollutants that we get in our catchments and our environments, the urban context, you know, all the usual culprits there, those can be broken down and re-released back to the environment. And the other things we need to consider are the likes of heavy metals, and we have to make a choice in that respect in terms of whether we're holding them within things like source control features, permeable pavements, filter strips, or whether we're releasing them into the wider aquatic environment where they can cause damage. So there's a call off there, but really there's no real decision on my part. It's you hold them in places where that can be collected at a later date and will cause no harm and no real concentration. Just to quickly recap on the safety aspect, because it is something that gets a lot of people's twitchy. There's a report done by ROSPA on the SuDS website, and it specifically looks at health and safety around open water SuDS features, and it specifically states that you shouldn't be using fencing. And also there's a nice little tagline quote that I often use: you should aim to make life as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible, which I think is a really sort of eloquent way of looking at it.
Yeah, thank you for that answer.
Add to that water quality business, Paul, is that
yeah.
what we found, we've done a lot of monitoring on hopwood as an example, but what you will find is in the first 12 months after the disruption of soil profiles, you release a lot of nutrients. So you'll find wetlands and pond systems full of quite a lot of algae, and they will have reasonably high nutrients. But as soon as those are flushed through, we're basically talking about clean, low nutrient water, and nearly all of the features which are at the end or through a SuDS management train, in our experience, they become clear and never. Algae are the big indicators, and we find that the water clears certainly within 12 months, usually before, and then there is no issue of additional nutrients getting to the end of these systems.
It was.
I think there is a problem when you get nutrients in surface water. One of the issues I think is that people have monitored wetlands and found that the nutrient removal or certain nutrient removal is variable and obviously changes during seasons. And if you take that on face value, you then have concerns about nutrients going through SuDS systems. But if you've got a well-designed management train, like Bob's saying, the wetland at the end of the management train is actually the indicator that it's working really well, because you're not getting the algae in there. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm very conscious about time, but I think that just probably demonstrates the enthusiasm our trainers have for SuDS. I don't think you're ever going to be able to get a good, thorough overview of SuDS in an hour. But I just want to thank Steve, Anthony and Bob for helping us with the presentations. And I've also just want to say on record that I've loved working with you guys since we started doing the training, so it's all good fun. So just want to also thank you for your time and for your questions, and please do keep an eye out for an email from us in the next coming days. There will be links to the website and further information, and also information about our training that we can help you. So without further ado, I will close down the broadcast and say thank you very much for your time and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.